Exodus chapter 15, we left off about verse 20. Then Miriam the prophetess, the sister of Aaron, took the timbrel in her hand, and all the women went out after her with timbrels and with dances. And Miriam answered them, "Sing to the Lord, for he has triumphed gloriously. The horse and its rider have been thrown into the sea." This was a celebration of God's victory over the Egyptians in the Red Sea that we've looked at extensively. And we talked about last week how that under the Old Testament law, Old Testament period of time, God was pleased with, in fact authorized the use of instrumental music in worship. That's why they worship God with instruments. It's because it was authorized and it was pleasing to God. And under the New Testament, we still provide music to God, but it's singing. It's a specific type of music that God wishes to have, and we find that in the New Testament. Verse 22 says, "So Moses brought Israel from the Red Sea. Then they went out into the wilderness of Shur. And they went 3 days in the wilderness and found no water." So they're going into the wilderness. They're not finding water, verse 23. "Now when they came to Marah, they could not drink the waters of Marah, for they were bitter. Therefore the name of that was called Marah." Marah is a Hebrew word that means bitter. And so remember, Moses is writing this as history that's already happened. So when he says in verse 23, they came to Marah, that place was named that because of the water there being bitter. Verse 24, "And the people complained against Moses, saying, 'What shall we drink?'" The complaints are going to begin. They are going to begin at this point, complaining. Verse 25, "And he cried out to the Lord, and the Lord showed him a tree. When he cast it into the waters became sweet. There he made a statute and an ordinance for them, and there he tested them." Verse 26, "And said, 'If you diligently heed the voice of the Lord your God, and do what is right in his sight, and give ear to his commandments, and keep all his statutes, I will put none of the diseases on you which I have brought on the Egyptians, for I am the Lord who heals you.'" So he's making it very clear to them, giving them a condition. That word "if" is a very small but powerful word. It means if you meet this condition, then the result will be this blessing. God throughout the Scriptures, both Old and New Testament, has been an if, then God. He always has. If this happens, or if you do this, then you will receive this blessing. If you do this contrary to my will, then this problem will come upon you. If, then. There's always been conditions that God has given to receive blessings or to avoid his punishment. There always has been and there always will be. So he's testing them. You listen to the voice of the Lord your God, and you do what is right in his sight. You give ear to his commandments. That terminology, give ear, refers to you listen to his commandments and to keep all his statutes. If you do this, then I will put none of the diseases on you which I brought upon the Egyptians. You will not receive the plagues, the problems that the Egyptians received when I put the plagues upon them. So verse 27, "Then they came to Elim, where there were 12 wells of water and 70 palm trees, and they camped there by the waters." So they went out into the wilderness, 3 days into the wilderness, and they found no water. And during this period of time, they began to develop an attitude of ingratitude. And this attitude of ingratitude is going to resurface numerous times throughout their wanderings, throughout their journey, as they're heading towards Mount Sinai. And so they're going to exhibit and show forth this attitude of ingratitude and murmuring and complaining over and over again. And we have an example of it here in chapter 15 and verse 22 through 24. He provided for them water, and he miraculously changed the water from this water that was bitter. The water was already there, and he changed the properties of it using this tree, and it became sweet. It became a water that they could use. Chapter 16. Exodus chapter 16 and verse 1. And they journeyed from Elim, and all the congregation of the children of Israel came to the wilderness of Sin, which is between Elim and Sinai. So they're getting closer and closer to Mount Sinai. Now remember what we talked about a few Wednesday nights ago, how that there was a shorter route up to the Promised Land. However, God had to deal with the Egyptians. He had to destroy the Egyptian army, and he did that in the Red Sea. And he's taking them down south to go to Mount Sinai to receive the law. They were also not ready, not prepared to go and do battle and do warfare with the nations of the Philistines and all of those nations that dwelt in the Promised Land. They were not prepared for that at this time. So he is taking them down a southern route, and they're going to go down to Mount Sinai, and there they will receive the law. Remember, that's where the whole process began. Remember, Moses was in the wilderness, and it was the burning bush on the mountain of God, where God called him to be the deliverer of Israel. Now he's taking this nation down there, some 600,000 families, approximately. 1.5 million, perhaps 2 million people. And there has to be provision for these this great multitude. They journeyed from Elim, verse 1 of Exodus chapter 16, and all the congregation of the children of Israel came to the wilderness of Sin, which is between Elim and Sinai, on the 15th day of the second month, after they departed from the land of Egypt. So this is the 15th day of the second month out. Verse 2. Then the whole congregation of the children of Israel complained against Moses and Aaron in the wilderness. So here we go again. The complaint is rising up. The ingratitude is beginning to come forth again. The children of Israel said to them, "Oh, that we had died by the hand of the Lord in the land of Egypt, when we sat by the pots of meat, and when we ate bread to the full. For you have brought us out into this wilderness to kill this whole assembly with hunger." You're going to kill us with hunger. First, we couldn't find water, and now here we are. We cannot have food. We don't have any food, and you're going to kill us with hunger. We should have just stayed in Egypt, where we had plenty of food to eat, pots of meat, and we ate bread to the full. So they're saying we had it better off when we were slaves in Egypt with the food, the provisions that we had, than being free, and now we're facing hardship and difficulty. Sometimes I think that reflects the attitude of people who become Christians, that after they become Christians, they run into hardship and difficulty after they're baptized, because now they're living a different life. And as a result of that, they had it easier before they were baptized, because they kind of just went along with what was going on. They went along with the flow. And they didn't meet resistance, because they just kind of did what everyone else was doing. And as a result of that, you're not going to be persecuted if you go along with the world. Well, now, after a person becomes a Christian, they run into these difficulties. And remember, these things are a test. Chapter 15 and verse 24. He made these ordinances there in chapter 15 and verse 23. 5 and 26 rather, to see if they are going to obey. And we're going to see that in chapter 16 as we go on. Verse 4, Then the Lord said to Moses, Behold, I will rain bread from heaven for you, and the people shall go out and gather a certain quota every day, that I may test them whether they will walk in my law or not. Now he is going to provide the bread from heaven, manna from heaven. We will see this a little later on and tie this into the New Testament as well. Verse 5, And it shall be on the 6th day that they shall prepare what they bring in, and it shall be twice as much as they gather daily. So every day he's going to provide this manna from heaven. It's going to be there. They're going to collect it, and on the 6th day they're going to collect twice as much. There's a reason for that. We'll see later on. Verse 6, Then Moses and Aaron said to all the children of Israel, At evening you shall know that the Lord has brought you out of the land of Egypt. Well, didn't they already know that? Yet they forgot. Though they didn't forget the events, but they forgot in the attitude of not being respectful and not being thankful and not having an attitude of gratitude. Oh, they remember the events of the Red Sea. However, now that their stomachs are growling and it seems like they're facing some difficulty, they tend to forget what God has provided for them up to that point. And so they are saying to them, Moses and Aaron are saying to the children of Israel, in evening you're going to know that the Lord has brought you out of the land of Egypt. We need to be reminders of who we are, where we came from, and what we're supposed to be doing. Isn't that the point of gathering together every first day of the week? Isn't that the point of studying the Bible? Reading it over and over again? Isn't that the point of the Lord's Supper? To remind us. It's a reminder. We tend to forget. Verse 7, And in the morning you shall see the glory of the Lord, for he hears your complaints against the Lord. But what are we that you should complain against us? They were complaining. They were saying in verse 3, We wish we had died by the hand of the Lord in the land of Egypt. We had it better off. And notice in verse 2 of chapter 16, they complained against Moses and Aaron. Moses and Aaron were the designated leaders of the nation, so to speak. And as a result of complaining against Moses and Aaron, who were their leaders, they were complaining against God because God was leading through them, through their authority that God gave them. Verse 8, Also Moses said, This shall be seen when the Lord gives you meat to eat in the evening, and the morning bread to the full, for the Lord hears your complaints which you make against him. And what are we? Your complaints are not against us, but against the Lord. So Moses and Aaron are reminding the people that when you complain against what is going on, and you're complaining against God's leadership, you're complaining against the Lord. Remember what God said to Samuel when the people demanded a king? We want a king just like the nations round about us. And God said to Samuel, They haven't rejected you. They've rejected me. Samuel was the last judge and a great prophet. And as a result of that, they were rejecting Samuel, but ultimately they were rejecting God because God was using Samuel's leadership. Verse 9, And Moses spoke to Aaron and said to all the congregation, verse 9 of the children of Israel, Come near before the Lord, for he has heard your complaints. That's something that needs to be emphasized. When people complain, when people stir up problems, when people get on their phone, or they might perhaps get on the internet, and they stir up problems when a congregation is trying to do what is right to the best of their ability, though not perfect, yet trying to do what's right, and they stir up problems, that is something that's serious, and people need to know that God is hearing that. God hears every single bit of that. All those words that are spoken. God is listening to those complaints. Verse 10. Now it came to pass, verse 10, as Aaron spoke to the whole congregation of the children of Israel, that they looked toward the wilderness, and behold, the glory of the Lord appeared in the cloud. The cloud there perhaps most likely refers to that cloud that was guiding them during the day, and it was a pillar of fire at night. And so here you have, in this instance, that when they looked towards the wilderness, that the glory of the Lord appeared in this cloud. This was a visible manifestation of God's brilliance, of a light coming from the cloud. Verse 11. The Lord spoke to Moses, saying, I have heard the complaints of the children of Israel. Speak to them, saying, At twilight you shall eat meat, in the morning you shall be filled with bread, and you shall know that I am the Lord your God. I am Yahweh your God. Now God, in His mercy and compassion and patience, is going to provide for them. He's going to provide for their needs. And as we see, as we read down through this, He's going to provide what they need on a daily basis, and make sure that, and know for sure that they are told that they're going to have to go out and do something to get that, and to collect what they need just for that day. And we're going to see that God wants them to do that and provide for their family. And then on the sixth day, He wants them to double up the portions. We'll see why in just a moment. So He says, you're going to eat meat in the morning, and you shall be filled with bread. Look at verse 13. So it was that quails came up at the evening and covered the camp, and in the morning the dew lay all around the camp. Quails came up at evening and covered the camp. During spring, that is between March and April, quail regularly migrated the Sinai Peninsula. That's where they were, the Sinai Peninsula. And now God is causing the quail to go into the camp and cover the camp. They're going to have so much as this covering the camp where they are. And verse 14, and when the layer of dew lifted, there on the surface of the wilderness was a small, round substance as fine as frost on the ground. Verse 15. So when the children of Israel saw it, they said to one another, what is it? That's the Hebrew word manna. Manna means, what is it? What is that? So God is providing them meat, quail coming in to the camp. And He's also providing this bread, or this substance it's called, as fine as frost on the ground. And when they saw it, they said, what is it? For they did not know what it was. And Moses said to them, this is the bread which the Lord has given you to eat. So He's providing for them miraculously for their needs. Again, there is no natural explanation for this substance being on the ground. There is no way that this can be explained naturally. It's a supernatural event. Verse 16. This is the thing which the Lord has commanded you. Let every man gather it according to each one's need. According to each one's need. 1 omer for each person, according to the number of the persons. Let every man take for those who are in his tent. An omer refers to a small bowl, about 2 quarts in size. A small bowl about 2 quarts in size. So each person is to gather according to each person's need. and for each person according to the persons that are in their tent. So they were to provide this food. Now notice this. We see here another example of grace providing and faith doing something to receive what grace has provided. God in His grace and compassion and mercy provided this for them, but they had to go out and they had to go get it. Their faith had to go out and gather this up for that manna to benefit them and their families. So grace provides, faith must do something to receive the blessing. Verse 17, then the children of Israel did so and gathered some more, some less. Of course, it would be according to their family and how many they had in their family. Verse 18, so when they measured it by omers, he who gathered much had nothing left over, and he who gathered little had no lack. Every man had gathered according to each one's need. Do you see that there's no wasting going on here? No wasting. You get what you need and you eat what is provided. I think that's a lesson for us. You get what you need and you eat what's provided. Verse 19, so Moses said, let no one leave any of it till morning. Don't waste it. Don't leave any of it till morning. Verse 20, notwithstanding they did not heed or did not listen to Moses, but some of them left part of it until morning, and the bread, it bred worms and stank, and Moses was angry with them. So verse 20, verse 19, Moses is saying, you don't leave any of it till morning. You eat what you need for that day, and you don't waste it. And then when it was wasted, so he became angry with them, that it began to breed worms and it began to rot. It began to stink. So Moses was angry with them. They didn't listen to him. Verse 21, so they gathered it every morning, every man according to his need. When the sun became hot, it melted. So this substance, this miraculous substance appearing on the ground, this bread which God is providing for them, when the sun became hot, it melted. So they had a window of opportunity to go out there and gather it up, each one according to his own individual need and the needs of his family. And they were told not to waste that. So there's an emphasis there on you get what you need. You get what you need and you provide for your family. And do not waste. Verse 22. And so it was on the 6th day that they gathered twice as much bread, 2 omers for each one, and all the rulers of the congregation came and told Moses. Now on day 6, they're gathering twice as much. Verse 23. Then he said to them, this is what the Lord has said. Tomorrow is a Sabbath rest. A holy Sabbath to the Lord. Bake what you will bake today. Boil what you will boil and lay it up for yourself. All that remains to be kept until morning. Here's the reason why they were to double up in their portions on day 6. The next day was going to be the Sabbath. Here is the very first mention of the word Sabbath in the Bible. Now, this is the first mentioning of the word, but the concept of the Sabbath was mentioned in the book of Genesis. Genesis chapter 2, where it talks about God ceased His activity on the 7th day. But the word Sabbath is not even in Genesis. The concept was there because Moses is recording what happened in the creation. He created everything in 6 days. On the 7th day, he quit his creation. He ceased creating things. That became a day of rest. He rested on that day, and therefore it became known, when you get to the book of Exodus, as the Sabbath. Now, the law, keep in mind, has not been given yet. They're not yet at Mount Sinai. The Ten Commandments has not yet been given. But what do we have here? We have God testing them to see whether they're going to be obedient to the will of God. So He is giving them one of the ordinances that He is going to fully reveal on Mount Sinai to Moses concerning the Sabbath. He's already preparing them for the pattern of their work week. 6 days you shall work, on the seventh day you shall not work, neither your servants, neither your animals, but you rest. That's in the Ten Commandments we'll get to in Exodus chapter 20. So right now He is preparing them for that concept of a 6-day work week and a 7th-day rest, even though it has not been officially revealed as far as an ordinance found in the Ten Commandments. He's testing them to see whether they're going to walk. Notice verse 4 of Exodus 16. Behold, I will rain bread from heaven for you. The people shall go out and gather a certain quota every day, that I may test them whether they will walk in my law or not. And then he says in verse 5, and it shall be on the 6th day that they shall prepare what they bring in, and it shall be twice as much as they gathered daily. So you get prepared for that 7th day. Because on that 7th day there's supposed to be no work done. So back to verse 23 of Exodus chapter 16. This is what the Lord has said. Tomorrow is a Sabbath rest, a holy Sabbath to the Lord. Bake what you will bake today, boil what you will boil, and lay up for yourself all that remains to be kept until morning. Verse 24. So they laid it up till morning as Moses commanded, and it did not stink, nor were there any worms in it. Now notice verse 24. What they kept for the next day, what they had gathered on day 6, and they kept for the next day, didn't spoil. But during the week, if they gathered more than they needed and they wasted anything, it says in verse 19 and 20, they were not to leave any of it till morning. And when they did that, it bred worms and stank, and that's what made Moses angry. That tells us that what happened there in verse 20 was miraculous. That it spoiled overnight, that was a quick spoiling of it. And so when it was kept according to the will of God, on day 6, stored up for the next day because they would not be gathering it on the 7th day, then it did not spoil. It remained, and it kept until morning. There was no worms, and it did not spoil, verse 24. So they laid up till morning as Moses commanded, and it did not stink, nor were there any worms in it. Verse 25, then Moses said, eat that today, for today is a Sabbath to the Lord. Today you will not find it in the field. 6 days you shall gather it, but on the 7th day, the Sabbath, there will be none. So on that 7th day, God did not provide any of that bread on the ground. And if they didn't store up for the 7th day, then they would go hungry that day. They were to prepare for that 7th day, because on that 7th day, they were not to do any labor as far as gathering that food. And He was preparing the nation for that event of the 6 days and then resting on the Sabbath day, the 7th day. Any questions or comments about that? Look at verse 27. Now it happened that some of the people went out on the 7th day to gather, but they found none. Hard-headed, stubborn people. He told them, you gather on the 6th day, you double up. On the 7th, it's not going to be out there. Still, they went out to look for some. Isn't that just like us today? Just like us. They went out on the 7th day to gather, but they found none. Verse 28, the Lord said to Moses, how long do you refuse to keep my commandments and my laws? Remember, this whole thing is a test. testing this people to see, are you going to be obedient to my will? Later on, it's going to be an ordinance that if you break the Sabbath, you're going to be put to death. There's going to be a severe penalty against breaking the Sabbath. How long do you refuse to keep my commandments and my laws? Verse 21, see, for the Lord has given you the Sabbath. Therefore, He gives you the Sabbath. Therefore, He gives you on the 6th day bread for 2 days. Let every man remain in his place. Let no man go out of his place on the 7th day. So here, he's testing the nation and said, He gave you enough for 2 days on day number 6. And still, people went out on the 7th day to try to find some bread. How long are you going to refuse to keep my commandments and my laws? Verse 30, so the people rested on the 7th day, and the house of Israel called its name manna. And it was like white coriander seed, and the taste of it was like wafers made with honey. So this substance, this bread that was miraculously formed on the ground, that they would go and they would gather, it's described here, it's manna. And manna means, what is it? That's simply the meaning of the word. What is it? And so that's why it's called manna. And it was like white coriander seed, whatever seed that is, and it had a taste of like wafers made with honey. Verse 32, and Moses said, this is the thing which the Lord has commanded. Fill an omer with it and be kept to be kept for your generations, that they may see the bread which I fed you in the wilderness when I brought you out of the land of Egypt. So they're to keep a memorial portion of this bread in a jar or a container. And this bread would never spoil. You find that later on in Scriptures. This bread would never spoil. It was a miraculous sign to show this is part of the bread that God provided for God's people. Verse 33, and Moses said to Aaron, take a pot and put an omer of manna in it, and lay it up before the Lord to be kept for your generations. It's going to be kept perpetually throughout Israel. As the Lord commanded Moses, so Aaron laid it up before the testimony to be kept. And the children of Israel ate manna 40 years until they came to an inhabited land. They ate manna until they came to the border of the land of Canaan. Now, 1 omer is 1/10 of an ephah. So this is kind of showing, here's how God provided for His people all this period of time. During this 40 years of wandering up until the time they went up to the promised land, they ate this manna that God provided for them. Now, as we've read this account, and you read more about it in the book of Numbers, turn to John chapter 6 in the New Testament very quickly. Remember in John chapter 6, Christ fed 5,000 people. He fed 5,000 people with 5 barley loaves and 2 small fish. Verse 15, therefore, when Jesus perceived that they were about to come to take Him by force, to make Him king, He departed again to the mountain by Himself alone. This group of 5,000 people are saying this person is providing food like Moses did. This would be the perfect king. He could miraculously provide for his troops food. He could heal their wounds. He could raise the dead. This would be an unstoppable earthly king. But Jesus didn't come to be an earthly king. You look at verse 31. They said, our fathers ate manna in the desert. As it is written, He gave them bread from heaven to eat. That's referring to what we just read. Then Jesus said to them, Most assuredly I say to you, Moses did not give you the bread from heaven, but my Father gives you the true bread from heaven. For the bread of God is He who comes down from heaven and gives life to the world. Just as that physical manna gave physical life to the children of Israel and sustained them for 40 years, Christ is saying, I am the true bread that's coming down to give you spiritual life. Verse 34, then they said to him, Lord, give us this bread always. And Jesus said to them, I am the bread of life. He who comes to me shall never hunger, and he who believes in me shall never thirst. But I said to you that you have seen me, and yet you do not believe. All that the Father gives me will come to me. And the one who comes to me, I will by no means cast out. For I have come down from heaven, not to do my own will, but the will of Him who sent me. So Jesus is saying here, I am this bread of life. Later on, He's going to talk about how that they need to partake of Him. Eat His flesh, drink His blood. And we'll talk more about that in the devotional time. But Jesus is saying, God provided for them in the wilderness, and I'm here to provide you with your most important need of all, spiritual life. They were wanting more free food. And Jesus was not coming to earth to provide free food for people. He met their needs when they were hungry, when they had gathered together to listen to Him preach. There was a need that needed to be met, just as there was a need to be met in the wilderness with Israel, and He provided for their needs, but then they come back to Him wanting to make Him king, wanting some more free food. Jesus said, I am that bread of life. I am the one that's going to provide you the spiritual, for your spiritual needs. And when they found out they were not going to get what they had hoped for, it says later on, in verse 66, from that time many of His disciples went back and walked with Him no more. Jesus lost numbers. Don't you think we'll lose numbers sometimes when we do the will of the Lord? Jesus lost numbers. They wanted a certain thing. He would not provide that for them. And as a result, many of them left. We'll talk more about John chapter 6 in our devotional.